Hey everyone, thank you for joining me once again to Manny School of Art for the 2025 season. Now we left off 2024 by learning a little bit about convex and concave forms and how they differ and how to create them in pencil. So we are going to create an illustration of a banyan tree using the idea of concave and convex forms, and we're going to do it as a pen and ink illustration. So we're going to be combining a little bit of brushwork with a lot of cross hatching. Now this illustration took quite a while to make. It took me close to 5 hours to complete. So I'm going to be showing like bits and pieces of it and kind of pointing out key elements that you need to know, and also giving you some tips on how to transition when going from pure black to pure white using brushes and cross hatching technique. So I hope you tune in for the video. Please let me know if you like it by hitting that like button and sharing. And if there's something that you would like to see a little bit differently, go ahead and leave me a comment down below. Okay, so all right, let's go ahead and get started with this video. Let me give you an overview of the steps that I've done so far to get ready for this video. So the first thing that I did is I took some time, and using my references, I created a drawing of a banyan tree. Because of the complexity of this drawing, I went ahead and used cross contours to help me figure out which areas were going to be convex and which areas were going to be concave. So anywhere where I see this little frown, I guess you can call it, that's going to be convex, meaning that that part of the tree is coming out towards us. Anywhere where I see like a U, that's going to be concave, meaning that it's going away from us. And if I see a relatively straight line, that area is pretty flat. Okay. Now, all of these can be done in combination. So for example, I could have something that looks like this to indicate a raised area, a flat area, and a recessed area, or convex area, flat area, concave area. Once this drawing was created, I went ahead and inked it up to make my lines permanent, and then I scanned it into my computer, split it up into 4 sections, and then in each one of the sections, I went ahead and tried a different technique to figure out which technique I wanted to use for the finished product. Now that all my prep work is all done and ready to go, I am ready to begin working on our illustration, the final version of this illustration. Okay. So you can see here in the drawing that if all we do is outline where the limbs and the aerial roots are going to be, that it looks like a line drawing, but we can't really tell which areas are going to be concave and which areas are going to be convex. So the next thing that I want to do is I want to go ahead and use my little diagram like I showed you guys here, and I want to decide which areas are going to be convex, which areas are going to be concave, and which areas are going to be flat. So now I am going to do this in pencil because when the product is done, we're going to be eliminating them. So now we're not going to see them. Okay, so I'm just going to do a section of this so that you can see how this is done. Okay. Now, the way that the banyan tree works, when these aerial roots come down and they hit the ground and they start growing and make these pillars and stuff, they become part of the trunk, basically. And what I found out when I was doing the research is that when the roots touch each other, they actually fuse together. So they're not like next to each other, they're actually becoming one. So that's why you see sometimes these really unique shapes that look almost like sculptures. So for example, if I want this part of the limb or part of the trunk to be sticking out, I can make the U forms. Now I can decide how much I want that to stick out. So it could be really shallow like this, or it could stick out quite a bit like this. So there's a choice. Keep in mind that these cross contours that I'm putting in, we're not going to see these at the very end. Okay, these are just soft guidelines to kind of help me figure out which area is going to be raised, which area is going to be recessed, especially when I start working with the lighting conditions. Okay. Now we're going to make this area right here concave. So we're going to have this going away from us or down like this. And then this is convex, so it's sticking up. And you'll notice that sometimes it comes up and then it kind of flattens out. That is pretty normal when you look at these beautiful trees. So growing up in South Florida, I remember these magnificent, beautiful trees growing everywhere. Parks, neighborhoods, golf courses, gorgeous, huge trees, upwards of 100 feet tall. And because of the way that the aerial roots come down and create these pillars, they also get extremely wide. I always assumed that they were Florida trees, but when I was doing my research, I found that they are actually native to India, and they were brought to Florida as a gift. All right, so I'm going to show you a little bit why I like to use cross contours when I'm doing something complex like this. If I were to just put down these lines coming down like this, doesn't really tell me a whole lot about what's going on, right? They just look like weird patterns on this tree. So the cross contour lines will actually tell me which one of these roots or trunk or limbs are either going to be raised or they're going to be concave. So let's say, for example, that I want to put like a little cavity right here. Okay. So then this area and this area would be convex. But the area in between would be concave or flat, depending on how deep you want it to go. Okay. So the cross contours gives me a lot more information about what these limbs are doing than if I just put the basic outlines. Now, having said that, if you are more advanced, you don't have to do this. Like, I don't always do this. It all depends on what effect I'm trying to go for and how complex the design is, how difficult the design is. So in this case, when I first started to do the drawing, and I was looking at my reference photos, it was tricky trying to keep up with all the different lines, all of these lines here. So I found it easier in this case to do the cross contours as I went along. That way I could see where the tree was going to be raising, convex, and where it was going to be recessing or concave. So this will give you a really good visualization as you move on to the next step, whether it's inking, coloring, painting, shading with pencil. All right, now that all of the prep work is out of the way, we are ready to begin the final rendering. Now, I've chosen to do the number 3rd option, which was cross contours, but we're going to be using a little bit slightly different than what I've done in the past. So we're going to be working with Black India ink. We're going to be working with a number 2 round sable brush, and I'm going to be using my my fine quill pen. Now, if you don't have these things at home, you can just do these with various types of markers, various sizes of markers. Now, of the 4 techniques that we were looking at, this one's probably the one that takes the longest. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to show you some steps on how I get this effect over here, and then I'll do most of this off camera, and then I'll come back in here and there and show you how the progress is going. So I'm going to show you how to do this little area right here, because we have a convex area and we have a little bit of a concave area here, and more convex here. So the first thing that I want to do is establish my light source. For this particular drawing, I've decided that I want the light source to come from the left. Okay, and I'm actually going to start with the number 2 sable brush, and I'm going to do this raised area first. Now, I'm going to use the brush for where I think the darkest shadow is going to be. To me, it's going to be right here, this core shadow, and it's going to be actually on the area that is raised, right? Not here. That is going to be a cast shadow from this thing here, okay? So I'm going to do the same thing here. Now this one is not nearly as tall as this one, so I'm going to make this line just a little bit thinner. Okay. Now I'm not going to outline everything. Okay, I'm going to think this more like a painting. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to be doing the outlining and the cross hatching as I go, rather than taking the time to outline everything first. Now the next thing that I need to do is I need to start transitioning from this dark line to a light area, which is going to be right in this area, to a medium area, which is over here. Okay, so to do this, I'm gonna do my first layer is going to be like a contour hatching. So I'm going to estimate where that light's going to be, and I'm going to start here, but I'm going to bend it like so. Now it's going to look funny at first, right? But keep in mind that right here, the light's going to strike here. So on this side, there's only going to be a little bit, right? Because I want the brightest area to be there. So these lines are going this way, these lines are going this way. And don't make them all the same. It's okay to do a little variance. So you can see that by doing the hatching on this side, we're separating this part from here. So we don't necessarily need to have an outline there. Now, while that's drying, I'm going to put my first layer of the concave area. So here, this is going down, and then it kind of flattens out. So I'm going to come here and flatten it out. Remember, because the light's coming from that side, this thing here, this root, is going to cast a little bit of a shadow here, and then it's going to get lighter on this side. Okay. So that's why I'm doing it with the concave. The light source is actually almost opposite of the convex. In fact, I would say it is opposite. Now remember, this is just the first layer, right? So on this side, I'm going to put just a little bit, but I want this side to stay lighter, but I don't want it to be pure white. The pure white area is going to actually be up here. And you can always go back as you're building up your layers and changing how bright something is. Okay. Now for the second part, if I was doing this with cross hatching, normally you would go with straight lines, but since I'm doing contour cross hatching, I got to think of this as coming this way, right? So if this is a cylinder and I have a diagonal line, it's going to come this way, it's going to bend this way. So for my second layer, I'm going to go this way. Now again, I'm leaving that area white for now. Okay. Now right here, this is the important part, where this black line and the cross hatching meet. We got a transition. Right now it doesn't look that great because it just looks like a line next to this. So we got to blend that. We got to transition it. So for my third layer, I'm going to go at a diagonal, but this time I'm going in this direction. And I'm going to focus right where this brush line and where the nib lines meet, right here. And I want to try to break that up a little bit so it doesn't look like a straight outline. Now remember that when you are adding your layers, you're not covering every single bit of each layer. You have to allow transitions. So like in some areas, you can see marks going in one direction, and some two directions, and then some three or more. Okay, and that's where your transitions are going to be. Now this to me feels too bright, so I can take some of this on this side and bring it over, or I can take some of it on this side and bring it over, because I want to move that highlight just a little bit further to the left. Okay. Now for here, we got to do the same thing, but this is not going to be as dark as here. So we have this little dip here, this little concave area here. So what I'm going to do for my second layer is I'm going to follow this curve here. And it's not going to be like I'm not going to follow it exactly, but I kind of want to get that to break up this edge here. Now I'm being a little bit more careful on this side because I don't want this side to be as dark as that. Because remember, this is kind of like a cast shadow. Okay. And then I will repeat the same thing for the next one. So let's do one more. This one's a little smaller, so light source is still coming from the left. So I'm going to start off by putting in my first layer, and I want to follow the contours of this like cylindrical form. Remember, try to keep this loose. You want it to look natural, so try not to make every line exactly the same. So some can be a little long, some can be a little short. You can have little bits in between, like little sections like this in between the longer lines. And then for my second layer, I want it to come this way. And this is where using a really fine marker really comes into play, which is why I like this little nib. It took me a little while to get used to it because it's so soft, but it takes very little pressure to change the weight of the line. So I can create like really fine lines, but I can also create thicker lines just by changing the pressure. So instead of changing and using 2 or 3 different markers, I just use one nib. Okay. Now normally I would let that dry a little bit, but for the sake of demo, right here where the brush line and the nib lines meet, I want to make sure that I break that up a little bit. Get a really nice transition. Okay. And then follow the same thing that I did here over here. So I'm going to come down, over, down, over. To me, when I'm doing this, the first layer kind of helps me identify like what the form is going to look like. You know, how much is it raised, or how convex it is, or how concave it is, or if it's flat, right? Because some areas of the tree are going to be relatively flat. So I give that first layer a little extra attention. Now on this side, just a little bit, right? Because I don't want the highlight to be all the way on the far left. We want it top left. But you'll notice that I try to keep the lines on the left side much thinner. And then move this light around just a little bit, just by adding a few additional tick marks here and there. And that's pretty much the way we're going to do this whole tree. So this is going to take a little while. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to keep working on this, and then from time to time I'll show you the progress on it so that you can see how it all comes together. And then after it's all done, we can check to see if we need to do any editing. But I think that we are going to do this entire tree in black and white. So we're not going to be adding colors to it. All right, we're about 37 minutes into this illustration, or the inking part of the illustration. So I wanted to kind of show you some progress and just remind you of a couple of things. First of all, remember that even though we're working with cross-hatching, we're actually applying values. Okay, like when we do it with a pencil, we call it shading, but we're still working with values even though we're doing it with cross-hatching. So keep that in mind as you're doing this, and always keep the direction of the light source in mind when you're actually doing this cross-hatching. The second thing is make sure that you do a really good transition between your brush lines and your nib lines. So like here I did these and I haven't finished the transitions, and it looks kind of odd. It's just a black line and then all of a sudden it starts cross-hatching. Where the one next to it, you can see that it's a very, very smooth transition between the brush work and the nib work. So, all right, so we're about an hour and a half into the inking, and you can see progress is coming along pretty good. One thing that I want to point out is that when I'm doing the inking, I leave the pure white areas wider than the final. That gives me a chance to make adjustments. So for example, I know that all of this is not going to be that bright, and so if I want to make an adjustment, all I need to do is figure out which areas I want to go a little darker and then just add a few more lines. So for example, this branch here is in front of this one here, so I know that there's got to be a little bit of a shadow underneath here. So just by adding in some extra lines, I can actually change how big that highlight is going to be. Now the reason that I like to do this, especially when I work with ink, is because I want to minimize mistakes. If I accidentally cover up an area and I decided I want to put in a highlight, then I have to use like a white ink or paint or something. And personally, I think that takes a little bit away from the effect. I guess it just depends on how often you have to do that. But for me, I try to kind of like start off with a wider highlight and then adjust it when I do my final pass. Now this isn't my final pass, so I still got quite a ways to go, but I wanted to show you a little bit so that you could see like what my thinking is, because hopefully the next time that you see this, it'll be pretty much done. Because for the rest, the process is just repeating over and over again. So now when you're working with this, remember that even though you're working with lines to create your shadows, so take a break. This stuff will start to mess with your eyes. So like about every 30 minutes or so, I step away from it, go upstairs, and just kind of do something else for a little bit just to give my eyes a rest. All right, so hopefully the next time you see this, it'll be completely done and you can see what it looks like. All right, so here we have the product almost completely finished. It's been 4 hours and 15 minutes worth of inking, and I included a little bit of foliage, but the focus of this illustration is the trunk, so I'm not going to do too much with the leaves. But the last thing that I want to do is show you how I adjust these highlights. So as I mentioned earlier, I left these really large areas of highlights until the very end so that I can go back and adjust them. So I'm just going to do a little bit here to show you how that works, and then we're going to call this one done. So let's say that I want to work on this little highlight right here. Now I know that this area can't be that bright and this area can't be that bright because it's going behind here. So what I want to do here, I can actually go in the direction of these limbs, right? Because cross contours can also run the length. So I can actually take some of these lines here and start bringing them in the direction of the limb. And then right here, right, because that's the part that's sticking out, it's probably going to be bright. So I'm going to stop here, and then I'm going to leave this area hot, and then I'm going to start getting a little bit darker on this side, where it starts to go behind this limb right here. So I think my nib is getting a little bit dirty. And then this way, going in this direction, because I don't feel like there should be that bright of a highlight coming all the way down. And then here, where it's tucking in behind these two limbs, then it's probably going to be a little bit darker. So I'm going to go ahead and change that up a little bit. So now, just by adding in a few extra lines, I was able to adjust where I want the highlight to be. Okay. Here's another scenario. So we have this raised area here, then it goes in a little bit here and in a little bit here. So what I want to do here is I'm going to start bringing in and adding just a few lines here, leave this area nice and bright, and then start adding in some lines going in this direction, following this slope of the tree, of the branch. And then it comes out a little bit here, and then it dips back down. So right here, I'm going to go like a little dip, then a raised area, and then another little dip here. So that's it. And that's how I'm going to go through and start adjusting these giant highlights, because I know that there's not going to be, that these highlights are just not going to run the whole length of these branches. Okay, but if it's easier for me to do that first so that I can adjust them at this final stages. So I'm going to go through and adjust the highlights, and then we're going to call this one done. I hope this helps you in your own drawing. So even if you're not working with trees, these techniques are really helpful when you're trying to do concave and convex areas. And remember that all of these highlights and shadows, even though we're doing it with cross hatching, it's just a form of shading, right? So if you wanted to do it with a pencil instead of with ink, you could do that. Okay. You can also do it with paints. So, all right. Thank you so much for watching, and I will see you on the next episode.